He had been born in Moffat, in the Scottish borders, on the 24th of April, 1882. His father was the headmaster of a small private preparatory school. Hugh was a quiet, serious, slightly awkward boy who preferred mathematics to games and was bullied for both. He passed into the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich at 18 and was commissioned into the Royal Garrison Artillery a year later. He served in Asia for most of the next decade: Gibraltar, Hong Kong, Ceylon, the northwest frontier, and developed slowly two reputations. The first was for unusual technical aptitude. He understood ballistics, mathematics, and emerging communication technologies better than any officer of his age in the artillery. The second was for an awkwardness in conversation that bordered on rudeness. He did not, by his own admission, understand small talk. He gave officers under his command exact, clear instructions. He gave officers above him exact, clear assessments, including, on many occasions, exact, clear assessments of their mistakes. The senior officers called him Stuffy. The nickname stuck for the rest of his life. In 1913, at the age of 31, he became fascinated by aviation and paid for his own pilot's license at the Vickers School at Brooklands. The next year, when the First World War began, he transferred to the Royal Flying Corps. He commanded a squadron at the Somme. He commanded a wing on the Western Front. He survived the war as a brigadier general. He was widely respected by the pilots under his command for what they described as his cold, exact patience in the planning of air operations. By 1933, he was the air member for supply and research on the Air Council, effectively, the senior officer of the Royal Air Force in charge of equipment, technology, and development. In that role, he made two decisions that would, in retrospect, win the Battle of Britain. The first decision was about the next generation of British fighter aircraft. In 1934, the standard frontline British fighter was a biplane called the Gloucester Gauntlet, open cockpit, fixed undercarriage, 2 machine guns, top speed 230 miles per hour. The Air Ministry had been planning to replace it with a slightly more modern biplane. Dowding refused. He wrote, in a memo so technically detailed that Air Ministry colleagues complained they could not follow it, that the next British fighter must be a monoplane, must have 8 machine guns, must have an enclosed cockpit with a retractable undercarriage, and must be capable of 300 miles per hour. He commissioned the specification himself. He fought the Treasury for the funds. He overruled colleagues who thought the requirement was unrealistic. The two aircraft that resulted from his specification were the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire. Both flew their prototype tests in 1935. Both were in frontline service by 1939. Together, they constituted the entire effective strength of Royal Air Force Fighter Command at the start of the Battle of Britain. Without them, there would have been no battle. The second decision was about radar. Radar, in the mid-1930s, was an experimental technology. The British physicist Robert Watson-Watt had demonstrated in February 1935 that a transmitted radio pulse, reflected off a metal object in the air, could be detected at a distance of 8 miles. By 1936, his team at Bawdsey Manor in Suffolk had pushed the range to 75 miles. The technology was promising but unproven. Most senior officers in the Royal Air Force regarded it as a scientific curiosity. Dowding regarded it as the only practical answer to the air defense of Britain. He wrote, again in technically detailed memos that his colleagues found exhausting, that radar would allow the Royal Air Force to detect incoming German aircraft 50 miles offshore, calculate their course, predict their target, and dispatch fighters to intercept them before they crossed the coast. Without radar, he wrote, the air defense of Britain was impossible. There were not enough fighters to maintain standing patrols, and any sudden German raid would be over English soil before British aircraft could climb to meet it. He demanded a chain of radar stations along the entire east and south coast of Britain. He demanded the construction of a network of operations rooms to process the data. He demanded the construction of underground bunkers to house the operations rooms. He demanded the training of thousands of plotters, controllers, and observers. He got everything he asked for. By July 1939, 2 months before the war began, the chain-home radar network was operational from the Orkneys to the Isle of Wight. It was the only fully integrated air defense radar system in the world. The Germans, when they began the Battle of Britain in July 1940, knew that the radar masts existed. They did not understand what the radar was for. Dowding was given command of Fighter Command in July 1936. He took up the post in a small office at Bentley Priory, a country house at Stanmore in northwest London. He spent the next 4 years building the system that the radar, the fighters, the airfields, the squadrons, the operations rooms, the controllers, the observers, the telephone landlines, and the women plotters would all eventually feed into. The system worked as follows. A German raid, crossing the English Channel, was detected by the chain-home radar stations on the south coast. The data, bearing, estimated altitude, estimated number of aircraft, was sent by telephone landline to a filter room at Bentley Priory. The filter room cross-referenced the radar plot with information from the Royal Observer Corps, with intercepted German radio chatter from a secret listening service, and with reports from radar stations along the coast. The filter room produced a consolidated picture of the raid. The consolidated picture was sent to the operations rooms of the 4 fighter command groups, then down to the sector stations, then down to the individual fighter squadrons. A squadron leader, sitting in his dispersal hut next to his Spitfire, received an order to scramble. He climbed into his aircraft. He took off. He climbed to an exact altitude on an exact compass heading. As he climbed, his sector controller continued to talk to him by radio, adjusting his course, adjusting his altitude, telling him exactly where the German formation was, exactly how high it was, exactly when he should expect to see it. The British fighter, when it arrived at the engagement point, was almost always in position to attack. The German bomber crew, looking up to see Spitfires diving on them out of the sun, generally believed that the British had been waiting for them by sheer chance. They did not understand that they had been tracked for an hour, that their course had been predicted, and that the fighters above them had been told exactly where to fly. That, in essence, was what Dowding had built. It is the reason the Battle of Britain is the only battle in military history in which a numerically inferior force defeated a numerically superior force by means of an information network. The battle proper began in July 1940. The Germans, having defeated France and forced the British Expeditionary Force to evacuate from Dunkirk, were preparing to invade England. The invasion required, first, the destruction of the Royal Air Force. The Luftwaffe began with attacks on shipping in the English Channel. They progressed to attacks on coastal radar stations and forward airfields. They escalated in August to attacks on sector stations and aircraft factories. By the end of August, they were destroying fighter command aircraft and pilots faster than the Royal Air Force could replace them. Dowding, throughout this period, remained in his underground operations room at Bentley Priory. He did not give operational orders. He had built his system so that the operational orders were given by the men below him, the group commanders, the sector controllers, the squadron leaders. His job, he had decided years earlier, was to preserve the system itself, to ensure that there were still squadrons in the air a week from now, a month from now, 6 months from now. He did this by carefully husbanding his reserves. He rotated exhausted squadrons out of the front line into quieter sectors in northern England and Scotland. He refused, repeatedly, to commit reserves to defending France in May and June, despite intense pressure from Churchill, a decision that almost certainly preserved the British fighter strength that won the battle 3 months later. He refused, in August, to send fresh squadrons south to replace the exhausted ones in the front line of the battle, insisting instead on rotating squadrons through a quiet sector for rest and recovery. The Germans, by the second week of September, had begun to lose the battle without fully understanding why. Their bomber losses had been heavier than they could sustain. Their fighter losses, while less severe, had reduced their available escort strength. They shifted, on the 7th of September, from attacking RAF airfields to bombing London. The shift relieved the pressure on fighter command sector stations. It allowed Dowding's exhausted squadrons to recover. It allowed the system to keep functioning. On the 15th of September, the Luftwaffe attempted a final mass daylight raid on London. They were intercepted by every squadron that fighter command could put in the air. They lost 60 aircraft. They turned back. It was the end of the daylight battle. Hitler postponed the invasion of England on the 17th of September. He never set it back on the calendar. The Battle of Britain was won. Dowding was dismissed from his command on the 24th of November, 1940. The official reason was that he had passed the official retirement age, that he had been kept on past it only as a wartime emergency, and that the strain of the battle had visibly aged him. The real reason was political. He had made enemies within the Air Council, within the Air Ministry, within Fighter Command itself, by being right about radar, right about monoplanes, right about reserves, and right about France, in each case at the expense of colleagues who had been publicly wrong about those things. His successor in command was Sholto Douglas, an officer who had spent the summer arguing publicly that Dowding's tactics were too cautious. Dowding was offered a position writing a book about the battle. He accepted. The book was suppressed by the Air Ministry on the grounds that some of its technical contents were still classified. It was eventually published in a heavily redacted form in 1942. He retired from the Royal Air Force in 1942 at the age of 60. He lived for another 28 years. He spent his retirement quietly. He was made a baron in 1943, taking the title Baron Dowding of Bentley Priory. He gave occasional lectures. He wrote occasional books, including, late in life, several volumes on his own private religious and philosophical convictions, which were unconventional and which embarrassed the Air Ministry whenever they made the newspapers. He did not give interviews about the Battle of Britain. He did not, by family accounts, like to be reminded of it. He did not attend the dedication of his own statue, which was eventually unveiled outside the Royal Air Force Church of St. Clement Danes in the Strand in 1988. He died on the 15th of February, 1970, at the age of 87. The statue, which faces east toward the City of London, shows him in his Royal Air Force greatcoat, looking, with the same expression his colleagues had described 40 years earlier, neither expectant nor pleased. It is the expression of a man checking that the system is still working. The inscription suggests his characteristic expression. It is also the expression of the man who, in the summer of 1940, sat in an underground operations room in northwest London and watched a battle being won by an information network he had spent 7 years building, without giving a single direct order to a single fighter pilot during any engagement of the campaign. He preferred it that way. If the story stayed with you, there are more like it, quiet planners whose names history forgot but whose decisions kept the lights on. New stories every week on the Untold front. Subscribe to follow the names that history almost forgot. Next time, a different operations room.